On Tuesday, Senator Raphael Warnock and Georgia Democratic activists called for greater early voting in the upcoming runoff election. Warnock and his Republican opponent, Herschel Walker, each failed to reach 50% of the vote on Election Day. In Georgia, that leads to an automatic runoff with the top two candidates. Warnock called for more dates for early voting in order to accommodate students and other voters who are traditionally infrequent in both normal and runoff elections. While Democrats held control of the Senate following the midterms, they desperately want to retain Warnock's seat. This would give them a one-member edge, which could perhaps free them of the need to bring moderate senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema on board for every party line vote.
Good afternoon. I'm Helen Butler. I'm a voting rights activist and speaking as a Georgian. I believe that we should fight for access to the ballot at all times. So as a voting rights activist who's been doing this for decades now, I believe that all 159 counties should consider having early voting start much earlier than November the 28th. I believe that the Tuesday and Wednesday before Thanksgiving would be just great to begin early voting process. When our legislature decided to change the 9 weeks of runoff early voting, of runoff elections, I don't believe they considered what it takes to really to do an efficient election. So we're calling upon all 159 counties to make the access to the ballot easier for this runoff period. We, as voters in the state of Georgia, need to be able to determine who gets to represent us. And to do that, we need to have those extra days, because most people just realize that they just finished an election and a lot will not understand that there's another part of that. But we're saying today, you as election officials can make that happen, can make access to the ballot for all the voters of Georgia much easier by having earlier voting days. That will include a Saturday voting. We know we have mandatory Saturday voting in a normal primary or election. So why not continue that tradition in this runoff period? We believe the law is on our side for that. So we're calling on all elected officials, election officials, supervisors, and superintendents to make this happen for the runoff period. We need early voting to begin, as I said, the Tuesday and Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It is possible to do, so let's do it for Georgians and for all who want to have a voice in this election cycle. I thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. I will now turn it over to Antonio Molino.
Thank you, Helen. I think it's important to know, right, that voting is one of the most fundamental rights that we have. You know, when I was in the military, one of the reasons that I enlisted and I wanted to serve my country was so that our rights would be protected. Voting is one of those rights. I'm here today for small businesses. We have cut our elections down from 9 weeks to about 7 days. That is what some counties are intending to do right now. That is simply not enough time to let the voices of the community, of the county, of our state be heard and counted. If we really want a representative democracy, we need to make sure that we expand the access for people to actually express their voice, their vote. Right now, we're here to call on our counties. I'm a Gwinnettian. I would love for Gwinnett County to start their voting process earlier. We really need to make sure that we give people the opportunity. If you're a small business owner, Saturday might be the only opportunity that you have to go vote. And why do we want to disenfranchise the backbone of our economy? We always say that Georgia is the best place in the country to do business. it should also be the best place in the country to vote. And next is Fee Wynn.
Good afternoon. My name is Fee Wynn, and I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. I am here on this cold and rainy day because I believe that Georgians deserve to exercise our sacred right to vote without barriers. We deserve for our leaders to actively invest in making voting easier and more accessible for students, for workers, for parents, and for all Georgians. And that includes ensuring that voters have choice and flexibility about when and how we vote. We at Advancing Justice Atlanta have worked tirelessly over the last decade to encourage, inspire, and empower our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities to help shape our collective future by exercising their right to vote. And in the 2020 general election, we saw our work pay off when AAPI voters showed up and showed out in record numbers here in Georgia. And what we know is that our community was able to show up in that way because they overwhelmingly relied on early in-person voting and voting by mail. 85% of AAPI voters elected to vote either early in person or by mail in the 2020 general election. 85%. Our community's ability and all Georgians' ability to fully participate in our democracy hinges on flexibility and choice when it comes to when and how we can vote. That is why it's crucial to make early voting available on Saturday, November 26th in the upcoming runoff, especially since it's an election in which voters will already have far less time to cast their ballots. Now, we've heard the law being interpreted to prohibit early voting on November 26th, but I've read the law, and I gotta tell you that interpreting the law to ban early voting on Saturday doesn't make the most sense from a legal standpoint, and it certainly doesn't make sense from a policy standpoint. The most sensible interpretation of the law is one that allows Saturday early voting for the runoff. And that's what the people of Georgia, that's what the voters of Georgia deserve. So I'm here today to urge all of our elected officials, all of our leaders in DeKalb County, in Fulton County, in Gwinnett County, in Cobb County, and all 159 counties in Georgia to give voters the opportunity to vote on Saturday, November 26th, so that as many Georgians as possible can be heard at the ballot box this election. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Virginia Hefner. It's an honor to have been asked to say a few words about this really important topic. My background is really corporate. I'm a banker by background and serve on corporate boards and also volunteer in the community, particularly around housing and arts. And I was honored to say a few words because what I've learned in the business community for almost 40 years, I've been working here and been blessed to have a very great life in this wonderful state, is because what I've learned is that the more data and the more input and the more voices that are shared in decision-making, the better the outcome. That's always not always an easy process to go through, but business people definitely have benefited from inclusivity, voices, ideas, etc. And when a final decision is made, you have a lot more buy-in when people have felt that their voice was heard. And I believe that in voting, I believe that in business, and I believe that in personal lives. And so I encourage all of the folks, all the great folks who work on elections, and thank you in advance for that, for the past and for the next runoff, to seize the moment to get more input from people who want to voice their concerns and however the election turns out, that they feel heard. I will say what has inspired me to really get involved in this topic on a bipartisan basis is really because we just honored veterans, and thank you for your service. My father was a commander of a subchaser in World War II, and fortunately came back And he said two things about America that really stuck with me. Well, he and my mother always said, don't be a bystander, so get involved. But two things. One, you don't need a passport to cross state lines in America, which I thought that was odd. Then I grew up and realized how really important that is. But second, cherish your vote. And cherish equally the people who may not agree with you, because that's what America is. And so that's stayed with me and inspired me to advocate for everybody to vote. So thank you. And I'll turn it to James Wilson, who's a wonderful young man from Georgia State.
Thank you so much. My name is James Wilson, and I'm currently a student at Georgia State University, and I'm also a poll manager in my county of Newton County. And as a poll manager, I can tell you that our early voting system is built for flexibility and accessibility. It's designed so that working families, working parents, senior citizens, and students like myself can make sure that our votes are cast. We didn't want to see any more long lines on election day, and so we made it our business to tell the legislature that we need more early voting on more days. And so with that said, with flexibility and accessibility in mind, I can't think of one reason why we would not extend that to a Saturday for early voting in this runoff. It's not clear to me as a poll worker or as a student why we are not considering every single avenue for making sure that every single ballot that wants to be cast can be cast. Saturday hours act as a lifeline for voters across identity lines, across political affiliations, economic classes, no matter what. Everyone, in some way or another, is going to rely on that Saturday. Saturday hours are a lifeline for students like me. I find myself oftentimes now in a position of choosing my democracy over my classes, and that should not have to be the case. Saturday hours are a lifeline for parents, especially working parents. It's hard for me as a poll manager to tell a parent that we close at 5 and you got off work at 5. Come back tomorrow. That shouldn't be the case. Saturday hours are a lifeline for poll managers like me also, because the more options we have, the less lines we see. And we don't want those lines. And so, what we're saying is simple. Every single county should have as much early voting as possible. And if that means early voting on a Saturday, then that's what it means. Saturday voting is more than some convenience. It's a necessity. It is absolutely a necessity. And right now, this early voting period is coinciding with a lot of my final exams. And so I have to make a corny joke because I'm 20. I want my voting options to be like my final exams with multiple choices. And so, with that said, now it gives me great joy to introduce someone who has never shied away from fighting for voting rights, Senator Raphael Warnock.
Thank you all so very much. It's great to be here, and I'm inspired by all of these Georgians who have joined me today and are so committed to ensuring that every eligible Georgia voter has access to the ballot box. And each of them in his or her own way is fighting to make sure that happens. I must say I'm especially inspired by the youngest member of the panel, and his commitment and volunteerism and his voice reminds us that the future of the state is bright. But all of these advocates who stand with me today believe, as I do, that the four most important words uttered in a democracy are "the people have spoken." The people have spoken. And so it is our obligation at the end of every election to ensure that those words are true, that every person who is eligible has had an ample opportunity to speak. I submit that it is the job of each citizen to stand up for the voting rights of every citizen. And that's why we're here today. I've said often as a pastor that your vote is your voice, and your voice is your human dignity. Voting rights are preservative of all other rights. When we talk about voting rights, we're not just talking about just another issue alongside other issues. Democracy is the house in which we get to fight for everything else that we care about. And And so voting rights are foundational. It is about the covenant we have with one another as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And I've spent a lot of my time, and a lot of my life, working with folks like Helen Butler, who's here, and so many others, the late, great Joseph E. Lowry, C.T. Vivian, John Lewis, all committed to making sure that everybody has the ability to vote. I've spent a lot of my time working to make the ballot box accessible and making it easier, not harder, for folks to have a say in their own democracy. For me, it is sacred. And I've had to stand up time and time again when we've seen efforts at the federal level and at the state level to make it difficult for people to use their voices. And so as everyone is discovering, some of the most suppressive parts of SB 202 apply to the runoff being held in the state of Georgia right now. This runoff is just 4 weeks. Think about that, just 4 weeks. Counties are in the midst of certifying their election, and as of today, we've got 21 days before the curtain falls on this election. In addition to that, you cannot register to vote right now ahead of the runoff if you weren't already registered. And there is a much shorter early vote period required of Georgia counties, as has been pointed out today. And now we've learned that on top of all of that, to add insult to injury, there is this interpretation of a rule now saying that the working people of Georgia cannot vote on Saturday, November 26th, despite saying just days ago that counties could hold early voting that Saturday. We believe that this is not only wrong, but it is a clear misinterpretation of the law. And accordingly, we have filed a lawsuit to protect the voices of Georgia voters and their ability to utilize their vote on Saturday, November 26th. And we're here today to say that we will stand behind counties who open up their polling locations and give Georgians the opportunity to make their voices heard that Saturday. Now let's talk about the practical realities of taking away Saturday voting. This is not a theoretical argument. These decisions have practical implications for ordinary, hardworking Georgia families. What does it mean? It means that workers who punch a clock may not be able to make it to the polls. Think about that. The folks who, in the midst of the pandemic, we started calling essential workers, frontline workers, parents with young children, being forced into a narrow space in order to exercise their basic constitutional right. Not only is it wrong, it is a misinterpretation of the law. Here's what I believe. I believe that access to the ballot ought to be nonpartisan. When the arguments have been made, and folks like me who are running for office have made their arguments, the people need to be able to speak. And it shouldn't matter if you're a black Georgian or a white Georgian, if you're young or if you're old, if you live in Atlanta or Appleton County, if you are a professional worker or working class, a salaried employee, or someone who makes an hourly wage. The field should not be tilted against you. And this is certainly something all of us should be able to agree on. And so that is why we are here today. We should be striving to give the people of Georgia fair access to the ballot box. We just saw an election in November where the people of Georgia made it clear that they want to use Saturday voting. Hundreds of thousands of voters, Georgia voters, voted on Saturday. They have demonstrated what they want. and there's nothing in the law as it is currently written to prevent it. And so we ought to correct this. Folks ought to have access to the ballot. This is good for our democracy, whether you are a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian. We should keep it up. And this runoff period is an opportunity to do it. Do during the runoff what you did during the general election. As I have done as a pastor and as I've done as a senator, I will keep fighting to make sure every eligible Georgia voter can have a say in their own democracy. Because I believe that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea. This notion that each of us has within ourselves a spark of the divine, that we were created in the image of God. And if that is true, we ought to have a voice in the direction of the country and our destiny within it. I believe that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children, and our prayers are stronger when all of us can pray together. So thank you so very much for the time, and now I am happy to respond to a couple of questions.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. The Senator's got time for a few questions before we head out. Let's start with Mark, ABC.
Dave, if he's not ready.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Senator, your thoughts on Fulton County, a judge overturning the abortion law, and another question, if I could, the thought of President Trump getting into the race and the impact it could have on your race, sir. Those two questions.
Well, I've been very clear about what I feel about reproductive rights. I believe that we ought not replace the wisdom of women and their doctors with that of politicians. And we're seeing right now the chaos that ensues when that happens. And it is one of the reasons why I think Georgians have a clear choice between me and my opponent. The women of Georgia woke up one summer morning to discover that a constitutional right that they had enjoyed for half a century had been taken away from them in one fell swoop. My opponent said that the court didn't go far enough. He feels that this activist court that has taken away this protection fell short of what they should do. He wants a nationwide ban on abortion, no exceptions, rape, incest, the life of the mother. I think that's wrong-headed, and I think it's out of step with where most Georgians are, Democrats and Republicans. And Georgia needs a senator who will stand up for women and stand up for their fundamental rights. We will see what President Trump decides to do. Here's what we know. We know that he is well practiced in the politics of division. And my opponent is his acolyte. And he too has spent his time moving across Georgia, campaigning with one of the most divisive members of the Congress. I think Herschel Walker is showing us what kind of senator he wants to be. He's moving around campaigning with one of the most divisive members of Congress. John Lewis was my parishioner. He's my model of what it means to be a good elected official, and I've spent my time in the Senate trying to bring people together, and that's what I intend to keep trying to do.
Thank you, Senator.
Matt, Washington Post.
Thank you. This runoff is obviously not that far away. What is your perspective on if you are not able to get in terms of voting within the time frame that you're asking for? And then my second question is, do you have a response to the Secretary of State saying that this lawsuit, quote, muddies the water for counties with election laws?
I have been fighting for voting rights long before I ever ran for office. And what we're asking for is nonpartisan and it's foundational. People ought to have access to the ballot. And that's what we'll continue to fight for.
Maya, New York Times.
Kind of a follow-up to Matt's question. You said earlier that you would stand with counties if they did indeed move forward with Saturday voting. Does that fall outside of whether or not this provision is lifted on Saturday the 26th?
We believe that counties are well within their legal right to allow for Saturday voting based on an interpretation of the law. We filed a lawsuit in that regard, and we stand by that. Yes?
I'm curious, have you all gotten any response or reactions from any of the county officials who received this letter from the DSCC?
Well, what we know is that some were planning to have Saturday voting. So, here we find ourselves in this conundrum. More importantly, the people of Georgia have indicated that they want to vote on Saturday. About a couple 100,000 Georgians voted on Saturday. And now we've got 3 weeks left, and they're saying no Saturday voting. I think it's a disservice to the people of Georgia. And since we're not hamstrung by the law, as we interpret it, people ought to have the ability to exercise their franchise.
Stephen, go ahead.
Even if a judge does allow Saturday voting, it's still up to the counties to decide if they want to have voting on Saturday. Many elections offices have been busy preparing for the last election, running the last election, and still certifying things up until right before this time happens. I mean, what do you do if a county doesn't want to have Saturday voting for giving their election workers a break?
Well, the opposite is our problem right now. The issue is that they're being told that they cannot. And folks at the local level, you know, these boards of elections have local folks who populate those boards of elections. And they ought to at least have the opportunity to do it if that's what they want to do. Right now, they're being told that they cannot. And that's the problem we're trying to address.
Emma Hurt, go ahead.
Senator, hi. The last time you were to run off control of the Senate was at stake, and it was a big argument that you and Senator Ossoff made. How do you think that no longer being necessarily a dynamic changes this runoff for you?
To be a United States Senator representing the people of Georgia is to represent the concerns, the hopes, the dreams, the anxieties of 11 million people. That's an important issue no matter who controls the Senate. And you have that responsibility for 6 years. So the people of Georgia have an important decision to make. It's about who's going to represent Georgia in the United States Senate. And I think that the contrast could not be more stark. Herschel Walker has demonstrated that he is manifestly unprepared and sadly unfit to represent the people of Georgia in the United States Senate. He has neither the competence nor the character. He has demonstrated that not only does he not know the issues, he doesn't seem terribly interested. Because if he were, he wouldn't say things like the people who are in the healthcare coverage gap. If you're able-bodied and you have a job, you have healthcare. Most of the people in the gap are working people. They're the working class. And they don't have access to healthcare. You can't see me. You can't serve me if you can't see me. And so that's the decision that the people of Georgia have to make. And I believe that at the end of the day, they're going to get this right and give me the honor of my life to stand up for hardworking people and their families for the next 6 years.
We've got time for one more. Sam, WAP.
The turnout rate last Tuesday was slightly lower than it was in 2018. I'm curious, do you feel like there were voters who were left on the table that didn't turn out last week? And how worried are you about being able to either turn them out for your runoff or bring people back in this limited window that you have to before the runoff election?
Well, we saw a record voter turnout during the early period, the early voting period, which is why we're calling this press conference, because the people of Georgia are showing you how their lives work and how they are best enabled to show up. It's ironic that we just saw record voter turnout during the early period, and the response we're getting now from Georgia officials is to short circuit the very path that Georgians have clearly laid out that they want to follow. So we're going to have Saturday voting, and I'm going to do everything I can to turn the people of Georgia out for this election. We want people to turn out on December the 6th, and early voting during the early voting period. We want to make sure that they have every opportunity to utilize that. Thanks, everybody.